Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition. This is number 4 of Common Objections to a Stateless Society, or Voluntarism, or Anarchy, however you want to phrase it. Today I'm joined with Chris Daly, who was on our episode 7 or 8? 8.
It was 8.
It was 8. Episode 8 of the podcast, and a newcomer, Phil. He is one of our friends in the group at Facebook. We just snatched up, so I said, hey, who wants to come on and do one of these videos? And he said, I'll do it. So, welcome, Phil. Want to tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm a statistician and an anarchist. Sometimes I blog under the moniker Anarchistician. And yeah, that's about it.
Cool, man. Cool. That's anarchist. What did you say?
Anarchistician.
that's pretty cool.
I got a wise crack from somebody at the FSP about me being a statist something because I have statist in my job title.
Oh.
Which kind of sucks, but
yeah, I called someone a statist one time and they go, I don't care anything about stats.
yeah.
I was like, that's not what that means. But you know what
Obama doesn't come from Keynesian.
Obama does come from Keynesian.
Yeah.
But you doing okay today, Chris? Ready to answer some questions that
Yeah.
I guess you came up with most of these.
Yes, all of them actually.
All of them, yeah. Well, I mean, you can't come up with who
Right.
will build the roads.
Right.
All right, so today we're going to go over 5 questions, or they're not questions, they're objections. You know, we're talking, and then they say, well, whoa. So the 5 real quick is, we need limited government. Why don't you move to Somalia? Voting is consent / you have no right to complain if you don't vote. How would we prevent monopolies? And illegal immigrants take jobs. I made it funny, or Chris made it funny, took my gerb. So we're going to let Phil go first on these, on this first question. And this is a doozy because, you know, people like myself who was raised, you know, conservative, little government, constitutionalist, they live, breathe, and die limited government. And they think that that's the answer for every ilk. So what would you say to someone who says, but we need a limited government? If we could just limit the government.
I would say why. So if they tell me that we need a limited government, I would ask them why. I think the burden of proof is on the person who wants to initiate violence, who believes that's a necessity.
Yeah, of course. The biggest thing I tell, you know, I set them up in a sophist kind of way. I say, you know, show me where limited government has worked.
Right.
So it's one of those things where they believe in this. They call us utopian for wanting a free society when they're the one who believe in a utopia, an idea. They believe that you can actually limit a government. You know, what's the old saying? You want to give an entity all the guns and nuclear bombs and say, hey, here, limit yourself.
Right.
It's not going to happen. Have you ever seen, like, when's the last time the government actually did something not wasteful or in a limited fashion? Can you think of anything, Phil?
No. Well, I know a lot of people will yell up and down Reagan, 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 or we had a surplus after Clinton, which is, you know, okay.
Well, yeah, the protection racket had a surplus.
Right.
Or, yeah,
Less wasteful isn't not wasteful.
Well, that's exactly the problem with the state, is that there's no incentive to be frugal or, you know,
Right.
save money or not.
It's not
waste
their money, yeah.
Right, and there's no repercussions for spending it poorly or, you know, having dissatisfied customers, i.e. the taxpayers. But is at the end of the day, you have to pay your taxes or you go to jail. So
Yeah, I don't exactly know what, like, in their head a limited government is, because even if a government followed the Constitution to the T, like the American Constitution, without any of the amendments that have been added to it, just the flat out what was signed and put in, I don't think even that would be limited enough. Like,
Well, there's the idea of the night watchman state. It's like, well, we have the three pillars of government that are necessary: the police, the inward violence, outward violence, and the courts, or whatever. But you can address all of those with say, I don't know if you've read Bob Murphy's Chaos Theory, but he
It's on
addresses
my list.
yeah he addresses I think all of those pretty well.
I desperately need to read that book. I like Bob Murphy a lot. Chaos Theory gets thrown around a lot on this podcast, and I'm really doing everyone a disservice by not reading it. Yeah, the Night Watchman state is the minarchist wet dream. It's the the limited government wet dream. It's the oh hey, the police will just do this, the government will just do this, the army will just do this, the courts will just do this, but then it never works out that way.
Right.
I mean,
Well,
right?
you can always go back. We if you look back in the when America, I keep saying that word we, but
It's fine. We won't kill you here.
yeah. We keep hearing this when America was first started. There are a lot of diehard constitutionalists that want to kind of rewind back, but it's like, no, since America first started, it did not limit itself. We ballooned up to this monstrosity that we've got now. So how do you think that if we go back to that, we're going to somehow suddenly retain that?
Yeah, I mean, I would beg to say that the Roman Empire, not at its peak, but somewhere in the middle of the Roman Empire, was not as oppressive as the strict constitutional, like first two presidents of the United States of America, because they didn't have the funds to oppress people as much. People just believed they were slaves in Rome. So it's hard to tackle an issue when when they revere their chains. But the whole idea of a limited government, Chris, it always perplexes me. I used to be such a proponent of it, and I could quote the Constitution all day.
Right. My thoughts on this are basically what Phil already mentioned, and what you were kind of alluding to, is that you start with a limited government. Even if we could get back to that point, what good would it do? I mean, the end result of having a limited government is what we have today.
Yeah, you're just you're pressing reset, and you're going to get the same thing faster.
Right. Exactly. So,
Because people know how to get to that point we were at.
again, it's like taking out 90% of the tumor and then just leaving 10% of it there for it to grow back again. Why would you do that? It doesn't make any sense.
That is the best analogy I've ever heard. I'm a limited oncologist. So, I guess we'll move on. So, basically the idea is limited government can't work. It's almost like when a communist says, well, if they just did this and this and this, then communism would have worked, because it's never really been tried.
Yeah.
It's the same thing as when someone with limited government says it. Well, if they would have just did this, this, and this, we would have had limited government. But, greed and all this took over. Like, yeah, that's because there's a utensil here. There's a tool that allows to be heavily warped due to greed and power. So it's called government.
Right, and it's part of limited government. I mean, if your basis is a piece of paper, like we talked about last episode, right, that's not binding for anyone who didn't sign it. It's certainly not for people who were born 300 years later, right? So that has to go out the window. That doesn't hold anybody to that agreement. Just because
yeah, for sure, yeah.
a bunch of old dead guys signed it. That's not...
Yeah, and if you go back to the communism example, the issue with communism was that the problem is that the corruption is inherent in the structure. So that's why communism never worked. It's not because it was never tried right. It's because the corruption is inherent in the structure. It's the same thing with any government. The corruption is inherent in the structure. If you base a society on violence, you are inserting the corruption directly into the structure of your society. So of course it's going to,
Oh yeah,
implode.
no, I see what you're saying. It's like It's like you're putting poison in the water, you know, and you're saying, "Oh, this water's got poison in it." But yeah, let's go to this next question here. It's or not question, but objection. So you've got someone, you're talking to, and then you get the love it or leave it, and the inevitable move to Somalia because for some reason the media has done a great job at propagandizing people to believe that Somalia is somewhat of a limited government or lack thereof. And then I have to tell people, well, everyone in Somalia wants government, so obviously there's going to be civil war and terror and destitution and despotism. But Chris, anything? What's your normal, like? What would you tell someone that's even thinking about saying to another individual, "Move to Somalia"?
Right. Well, if you know even only a little bit about the history of Africa in the last few hundred years, all of the foreign intervention going on there and the imperialism and power grabs, it's all led to this chaotic scene you have today where there's, tribal warfare like on a mass scale, and you got pirates going on down there, and there's no, the government's changed hands so many times that, there's no real permanent structure anywhere like Somalia. It's just chaos and violence, and that's,
I wonder what government caused all that chaos in Somalia. Right now, I can't really think of what government it was, but I think it starts with a U.
Mm.
I don't even understand where this argument comes from. Because Somalia, forgive me, I'm not all that well versed on Somalia, but as far as I've seen, it has never been an anarchistic society. I think this is all just going back to grade school, when we're taught that anarchy equals chaos. It's like, no, that's not how any of this works. But
certainly, if you're defining the state as an institution that initiates violence, well,
well, there were always established governments in Somalia. They've just had a civil war, and
right now there's 3.
Violence. Yeah, it's not like there's no government there. There are,
and they have Muslim-ran courts.
So what?
And they have Muslim-ran courts, the Sharia law courts over there.
Right. Yeah. Well, I didn't know that, but
yeah. So I don't know. Like, if you know what anarchy is, you know what voluntarism is. That is probably, other than Soviet Russia or 1940s America, there's really not a worse case of statism than Somalia right now, because you have a lot of people that are picking sides in a civil war because they want their government in power.
Yeah, Mogadishu has a government that's clearly working in on reconstruction with Turkey. It's under rule. It's not.
No, we like, a lot of people don't know what anarchy is. So when you're telling them these things, the only point of reference, the only baseline they have is to think back to what they've been propagandized to believe.
Yeah.
So
the chaos and violence and.
Yeah, they think an area that's got chaos and violence is anarchy. That's not anarchy. That's
just
government.
Because you have a government that doesn't have total and complete control doesn't mean it's stateless. It just means, there's at least one state, and in this case multiple state or groups trying to become a state that are at battle. And that's where the chaos comes from. And to associate chaos with anarchy is just incorrect.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that. So, is there anything, what's your best response to when someone says, you can move to Somalia, or you can move, or you can leave, etc., etc.?
I think this is one question you already touched on in a previous episode. You can move. But basically, if you really don't want to talk to the person, you just say, why don't you move to North Korea?
Yeah.
Why don't you move to North Korea if you like being told what to do so much?
Right.
Well, if they tell me that, if you don't like it here, you can move out, I say, well, I plan to. And
Yeah, will you pay my expatriation?
Right. Will you pay the exit tax or the uh, uh, blood money?
Yeah. So, our next question, and this probably is going to go for a while, is voting is consent to the system. You have no right to complain if you do not vote. Now, Phil, this goes up to you first.
That okay. So the way I respond to that, I kind of say, okay, so a guy calls you up. He tells you he's got your wife and your sister-in-law locked in his basement, and he's going to shoot one of them, and you can choose which. Which do you choose?
Hmm.
Clearly, you're going to choose your wife. Does that mean you're consenting to him shooting your sister-in-law?
No.
No. How is this any different? This is, I mean, this is.
Yeah,
And if you tell him no, I'm not going to choose. He's still going to shoot one of them. So how is that
yeah,
consent?
I look at it like this. When you vote, you're giving consent. So therefore, if you voted, then you can't complain with the response or what happens. The outcome. I told this to my dad. When he was mad when Obama got reelected, and I told him, I said, you should be happy that your democratic system is working right now. The vote that you cast was consent to the system, and you should be happy that Obama got elected because the system's working. The majority won.
I actually don't really follow that. I mean, I don't think that voting is consent either. I think voting is simply, trying to reduce the violence, trying to get the best outcome out of a crappy situation. If violence is going to be cast, I mean, if you think that what you are going to do, even if it's even if you're telling them to shoot this person rather than that person, you're still at least trying to minimize the violence, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's consent, because one of them is going to get shot either way.
Chris?
I think of it this way. I'm not sure I would say voting is necessarily consent, but at least in this country, for now, voting is not mandatory. There's no threat of violence backing up not voting. They're not going to put you in jail if you don't vote. So for now, it is a choice. You can choose not to vote. And if a whole lot of people chose not to vote, I mean, now we have a whole lot of people who don't vote, but if, say 95% of people didn't vote, I mean, how could that system even consider itself legitimate?
Yeah, I 100% agree. There's 333 million people living in the United States of America, and I think 68 million chose who president was. So, I mean, you think about that, that's less than 1/5, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's so at what point does the government go into panic mode and say, "Wow, these people aren't voting anymore"? It's just, I mean, we're not able to justify ourselves.
It's a good question.
And
Well,
20 million?
So there's, I don't believe that you can gauge individual action or the morality of individual action based on collective action. So in that situation, it's like, well, if we all just stopped voting, then at a certain point there would have to be, the system would have to realize it's illegitimate. I would actually argue against that. I don't think it would. But at the same time, that doesn't necessarily influence individual action. So you can't base your action under the assumption that maybe everyone else will do it too. Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me, yeah. Like, you can't, this issue of voting, and people that say you need to get out and vote and stuff, I really just don't believe in voting anymore. I don't think that your vote can actually change anything. And even if it could, let's say like you got your pie in the sky elected, representatives, they're still welfare whores. They're still elected and are paid for by stolen funds. they're pirates. Almost every politician is a thief. Well, no, every politician is a thief unless they don't take their money and don't vote to distribute any stolen funds or steal any funds further. So therefore, you couldn't even call them a politician at that point.
Right.
Right.
Even if they didn't accept salary and they're not a thief, they still initiate force or decree that other people initiate force. So, they're still a criminal.
Yeah.
And I would agree with you. I mean, I don't think voting is legitimate. I don't vote either. I don't think that voting is, it doesn't do anything. I would almost even argue that the elections are rigged enough for your vote to actually not do anything. Like not even the small minuscule fraction of a percentage that it would do.
I mean,
But,
I live in Alabama. A Republican's going to win whether I vote or not.
Right. Yeah. I actually live in a swing state. I live in Florida, but it's even then, Florida is one of the most manipulated races just about every election too. So
It's terrible.
yeah. Oh crap.
Bush and Gore.
Right. Yeah. Hillary and Obama. We actually lost our primary when it was between Hillary and Obama. They actually kicked us out of the primaries. And then after the primary election had already gone through, Hillary decided to make it count, and she successfully got it to count for like a half a vote each or something like that. It was
Wow.
yeah, it was complete crap.
Yeah, if you look at if you really think your vote matters, and I'm speaking directly to anybody watching this video, I want you to Google the word gerrymandering. And then I want you to go pull up your congressional district, and I want you to look and see how gerrymandered it is. And then I want you to look at all the cities in that gerrymandered district, and I want you to find out how much in common you have with any of the people on that. It's insane. So, yeah.
The bigger moral question is, what right do any of the people in that region have to vote on how you have to live your life?
That's the biggest moral question of them all. People don't realize that that's what voting is.
Doesn't matter how big of a scale it is. It could be your town or the whole country.
Well, if that's what positive voting is. So, I mean, I would still say that defensive voting does exist.
Right.
I don't think that defensive voting is a a lot of people say that defensive voting is just complete crap, or it's still voting for violence, and to a certain extent, yeah, but there's still a difference there between trying to mitigate violence by voting for less than just letting it be.
Yeah, there's different ways to attack the system, for sure. But, I mean, I'm pretty sure the only way I would ever cast another vote, and it would only be to cast a vote yes or no on this, would be to end the drug war. And
right.
I think that's some of the worst legislation that has ever been passed on humanity.
Yeah. Yeah, I was actually one time that I do plan on voting, if I'm still in the States, is in 2020. I plan to vote for Adam Kokesh. And that's, other than that, I don't, yeah.
Mr. Kokesh.
Even though then I know it's not going to do anything, but.
So, Chris, anything else on voting?
Yeah, I would agree. Definitely, defensive voting is legitimate, and I would say it's definitely not consent. I mean, if you're in a tank of water that has 100 piranhas, and you have the ability to vote to possibly change that to only 90 piranhas, would you try to do that?
Of course, yeah.
So,
yeah, I mean, it. Whatever you got to do to stop the torture, right? I mean, that's what torture does, is get you to confess to stop it. But I don't know. There's some people like me, I'll never vote ever again, except for maybe on the drug war thing. It depends on if it's going to pass or not, or if I have doubts. But
Right.
even then, my vote doesn't matter. It's going to be on if the banks, if the prison industries, if the police unions want drugs to be legalized.
I got a buddy in Illinois here where I live, and the last election we had, he took a picture of his ballot and he wrote on it no consent, and he crossed out every single candidate. He wrote no consent on every one, and then on the questions, he just said no to everything, and he wrote in no consent everywhere, and he illegally took a photo of his ballot and put it on Facebook.
Oh Lord.
Yeah, I think that was making the rounds. I think I saw that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna move on to the next one, and it's this is a question that confuses a lot of people. They think the government actually fixes this issue when we know that government is one of the largest of these. And the question is, how would we prevent monopolies, Phil?
Compete. I mean, if you don't like only one business doing this, then open a business that competes with them. There's no government stopping you now, so.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, the only way that monopolies can exist are one of two methods, and one of them is even arguable. One is by government enforcement, and the second is by just flat out impeccable and cheap service. If they aren't the best at what they do, they cannot maintain their monopoly. And as soon as a company starts to suck, somebody will compete with them and knock them out.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you look at any monopoly ever, the government has played a hand in it in some fashion. And then you look at what government does. It monopolizes force. It monopolizes theft. It monopolizes all this other stuff. Water, roads, police, military. It monopolizes all of that to where no one can compete and provide a better product. So you have this situation where people think the government stops monopolies when the government is the only reason, in my opinion, that monopolies exist. Because the idea of a government or of a business outside of rural or a scarce supply of a resource issue, it's very hard to monopolize things just period without government force, without someone saying that's the only motherfucker that can do that right there. Mm-hmm. He created that thing, he patented it with us, and he's the only one that is allowed to do that for arbitrary amount of years.
Right. I mean, government is the ultimate monopoly.
Yeah.
And it's
the monopoly, the initiation of force.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you ask a libertarian
from any other group of people,
you ask a libertarian to define government, if they don't say a geographic monopoly on the initiation of force, then they're not a libertarian.
Right.
They are a statist. Chris, anything to say about how would we prevent monopolies?
Right. Well, here's the thing. In a stateless society, you wouldn't want to stop a monopoly, right? There's so much stigmatism around monopolies and how horrible they are, but the truth is, what's horrible is when the government uses force to maintain a monopoly, whether it's their own monopoly on initiating force or if it's a corporation that gets benefits from this government power. But in a stateless society, if you had a monopoly, like Phil said, the only way it would exist if it was impeccable, if they had great service, and if there were ever anyone who tried to compete, they would have to be so much better than all of these competitors to actually maintain a monopoly. So if this 1 in a million situation happened where there actually was one company that was a true monopoly, it would be a good thing because they would be so good at what they do, right?
Yeah, I agree.
So
you look at
that point, you wouldn't want to get rid of it. It would make no sense.
Yeah, you look at how almost every billionaire that was in charge of a monopoly, how they used the fascistic arm of the corporate state to tear their monopolies apart, and then they got bigger chunks of it. David Rockefeller is the biggest example of this. They got Standard Oil torn apart to his benefit. He became like 5-6 times richer after they broke it up because he would only agree to break it up if he could have 33% of every company that his company turned into. I believe. I could be wrong. Some John D. Rockefeller aficionado could probably shit all over me on this one. But
Let's
either
go,
way,
Jones.
he went from the richest man in the world to so far the richest man in the world that it'll never be accomplished again. Like, he legitimately, John D. Rockefeller was so rich that there's no one that can be comparable in modern times.
And then people will say, "Oh, the government has to tax him more or step in and do something because it's inequality." But
there's not one pie of wealth in the planet.
Is because the state helped to get it all. So that's the problem, not the solution, right?
Yeah, you can't use the government to fix a problem that they caused, and then they're only going to cause a bigger. Ma Bell is another one. They broke up Ma Bell down here and created like 5 different phone companies, and
Right.
the owners, the stockholders of Ma Bell, all became richer off of it. So, explain to me how government intervention stopped the problem there. And I'm not saying getting rich or obtaining wealth is a problem. A lot of times socialists have an issue with wealth. They think that there's, a finite amount of wealth in the world, and if someone has too much of what they consider wealth, it's an evil thing and they need to be trimmed back. But wealth is subjective, number one, and number two, it's not finite. It's not like we're playing Monopoly and the bank is the only amount of money on the world.
Yeah,
So-
the biggest fallacy you tend to run into with statists is the zero-sum fallacy, where, if that person's making so much more than everyone else, and that means everyone else is losing that much. And it's like, no, it doesn't add up to zero, right? Wealth can be created.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Donald Trump, big thing Donald Trump said, and you can take this for a grain of salt because the guy's a raving lunatic, but Donald Trump said, your lifestyle doesn't change from 20 million to 200 million. Like, what you can buy, what you can do, how you live doesn't change. Once you get to $1 billion, everything changes. But, it just goes to show you at a certain point, you could have all the wealth in the world, and anything after a certain point, it doesn't matter. It's just like how many boats can I buy? How many hotels can I open?
Right.
At a certain point, you've hit a nexus, you've hit a ceiling that anything past that doesn't matter. It's pointless.
There's a study on Fortune or CNN or something that the happiness grows as income grows, but only up to 75,000. And once somebody surpasses 75,000 a year, generally their quote unquote happiness levels off.
I mean, if Donald Trump wants to trade bank accounts with me, we will see if that theory is true.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah, you can take it with a grain of salt.
with stress level of jobs, probably.
I think it's all
Yeah,
about
that's
what
right.
you're being born into as well. So, like, let's look at a king, for instance. His children are born into relative monstrosity of wealth, right? Their happiness is going to be set at a different level than mine, yours, and Chris's, because we most likely either grew up in upper middle or just middle class families. So, making $100 million a year, we would probably have some kind of issue that we'd be thinking, wow, this really isn't fair, or this isn't happy, this doesn't make me happy, I'm not happy, because we're not, our family, I wasn't raised to be used to that amount of money, etc., etc. I mean, there's a poker ideology. If you play poker, if you're playing $100 tables and then you go move to a $50,000 table, you're not going to be able to handle that because that's more money than you can conceptualize. But the guys playing at 50,000, they go back to 100 and they think they're playing with pennies. So wealth is subjective, and how you handle wealth is also subjective. So I don't know if the whole $75,000. I think for the common person, if you'll allow me to be collectivist at some point, the common person, I think 75 grand would probably make them happy. But if you took someone who grew up being Bill Gates' son and then said, hey, live off of $75,000, they would probably be miserable. So,
Right. It's important to remember that value is objective.
Oh, for sure. Oh me. So how would we prevent monopolies? We just basically summed it up. Monopolies only exist through government. Well, not only. I would say 99.99% of the time.
Negative monopolies only exist through government.
Yeah. Like, the idea, like, okay, so we live out in the middle of the desert, and I have 5 cows, and they're the only cows for 10,000 miles. I have a monopoly on cows, okay? That's because I own all of them. That doesn't give you a right to them. That doesn't make, if you want to buy one, I can sell it to you, but that doesn't make me evil. That doesn't make my monopoly evil. That doesn't make that an unfair advantage to someone, because I obviously took the time to get the cows to the middle of the desert in this oasis that we're all living in. So
Right.
the monopoly there isn't evil. The monopoly is only bad when force is put into the equation, when it's a forced monopoly, a fascistic monopoly.
Well, that brings up a question then. So what do you do if some company is successful at getting large enough to use violence to maintain its own monopoly?
Boycott. Don't buy it. At the end of the day, you can't provide a product to a voluntary market through force and have people buy it from you, because then that's robbery, and they could take you to court, sue you. If you didn't want to go to court, people would say, why don't you want to go to court? I'm not buying your product until you go to court with this person. So, etc., etc. There's Facebook and Twitter now. Let's just say Philco owns all the Whizzle-de-dats in the entire world, and he's forcing people to buy him. And then I tweet out, hey, Philco is forcing me to buy his Whizzle-de-dat. You're going to get boycotted on Twitter. There's going to be news articles about it. You're going to get people protesting at your factories, etc., etc. You're going to lose money because people are going to pull out. So you either do it voluntary or you get ostracized out of existence. You go bankrupt.
Well, it's not just, that would happen, but also in a stateless society, if you started initiating force, people would fight back. They wouldn't put up with that.
Right.
Oh, for sure. If you came into a town and said, we're going to be the only, peace officer department, and we're going to shut down anybody that tries to compete, you're going to get killed.
Right. How many people in that town belong to how many different defense agencies that would all be looking for you?
Yeah, exactly. You're going to get shut down quick. So it's very hard to run a monopoly without the strong arm of the government, is the point that we like to make. Is monopoly possible outside of government? Yes. But it's very, very not likely.
And if it does, it'd be a good thing.
Yeah, like if someone invented something, told no one how to make it, and they were the only one making it, but everyone's quality of life improved because of it. Let's just say it was some kind of a 5-cent water filter that filtered everything out of water. That person is going to be able to, that monopoly on that item until someone can make a better one or somehow get the plans to make their own, it's not hurting anybody.
And that guy will deserve every million he makes.
Exactly. He's benefited society.
Yeah.
So we'll go to our last question. We'll try to be short on this. Maybe this will be our shortest video. Illegal immigrants take jobs. Now, this is a complete status question, because this only exists in the status paradigm. Because if there was no countries, there would be no borders. Therefore, there would be no illegals. There would be no one illegally immigrating to an area. The only reason illegal immigrants come here now is because of government creation through government welfare and jobs that people won't do here.
And to get away from the government-created drug cartels.
Well, that's just here. We're not talking about in England or Spain, Morocco, etc., etc. We're talking about just America. If you'll allow us, people, to Ameritize this point, that would be awesome, because
Europe
it
has
translates.
Plenty of illegal aliens, and Germany has issues with I can't remember where, but they have some people complaining about
Pakistan.
I don't think that's in Germany, is it?
I know
Is it?
that's England. Is Pakistan. It's the Ethiopians, the northern West Africans, Ethiopian, Libyans, that area. They go to Germany. The Somalians,
Right. Okay.
the Nigerians, they go there, and they get on welfare and they don't work and they just huddle up in free housing and just suck off the government teat as long as they can, and
Yeah. Sweden's
they
having that problem.
they become voters, and then they vote for more of this, and pretty soon the government can't afford to sustain itself. Not that any government can, and then it
Which
goes.
brings us back to America with anchor babies.
But that's still a nationalist idea, the anchor baby thing. That's or
Oh, yeah,
being against
definitely.
anchor babies. And, what do you say to someone, Phil, that's anti or that they're anti-immigration, so to say? Like, this argument is kind of a shit argument once you say, okay, there's no borders, there's no countries, but what do you say to someone who wants to put this in this paradigm?
I have this argument so many times with my right-leaning friends, and it's really just an issue of what you said. So, well, what makes them illegal, and why is it? I mean, why do they have to be illegal? Because it's like, well, they're illegal because they're not going through the right paperwork, blah 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 blah. Okay, well, what is the issue with that paperwork? Leaving aside the terrorism issue, which is bogus concern too, but the whole reason for this is because of regulations. It's like, well, why are they taking your job? Because minimum wage is pricing you out of work, and pricing legal people who would want to work for less out of a job. So the people who are hiring them are largely, doing so illegally because they're working for much less than they're legally allowed to pay people. Also, not to be harsh, but if an illegal alien took your job, then they deserved it more than you. Sorry, but if they're worth more than you for the company, then they deserve the job. I mean, if they're willing to do more for less, then why do you get to, apply force in order to keep that?
Chris?
It's just an entitlement.
Yeah, you're right. You think people think they're entitled to some kind of job or some kind of protection that the government can afford them to protect that potential job, and a job is not tangible.
Right.
It's not a commodity. It's not like they trade jobs in the stock market. A job is a product that needs a demand met. I need people to mow my grass. Will anybody do it? Yes, I'll do it. It's they don't just exist. It's not, people have that like Marxian factory owner, like, what the fuck is a factory owner? What are these? It's so stupid to think about. Like, okay, the factory owners, and they're hiring this many people, and they need to allow them to unionize, and it's like, what? But like the people that, like, the factory owner has 10,000 workers, they want to unionize. There's 10,000 Mexicans that'll come work for half the price and don't want to unionize. What the fuck would you do if you were the factory owner? Mm-hmm. Like, honestly, like, I would ask the most hardcore union supporter in this country, or communist, what would you do if that was your factory? You could say, oh, I'm a nice person, I don't really believe in so much profit for the the factory. And it's like, it ain't about profit. That person's got to make money. They want to build more factories to give more people jobs. Chris?
The only problem with illegal immigration, usually conservatives bring this up, is that, they think illegals...
No. In America, conservatives bring it up, but the socialists are the ones bringing it up in the European countries.
Right, and it's because it only matters in the context of socialized resources. When you have people who supposedly are not paying into the system but are reaping the benefits, that's just a drain on the socialized, benefit system. And that obviously can't last forever. But, anyway, to a conservative, I would say, you got a lot more things to worry about than illegals draining the system, which it's kind of erroneous to say that anyway, because a lot of illegals pay taxes.
And buy stuff.
Right. So I would say, illegals, if they are, like Phil said, if they actually convinced your employer to fire you and hire them, they're probably a much better worker than you, and you should be ashamed that you're such a shitty worker. But the problem is, like, people who want to work legally and live in this country, who are citizens, they don't have a choice. Like, if their employer wants to hire somebody for less who's illegal, right? You're forced to live with this minimum wage. You can't. It's tough to compete because there's the threat of state violence if you are working under the table. Some people are willing to take that risk. A lot of times illegals come from places that, they'd much rather be here instead of back where they're from, so they take that risk. But, anyway, in America, that's a lot of Americans don't want to take that risk of going to jail working under the table. It's like, if you're going to work for untaxed, under-the-table pay, right, wouldn't you want to do that? That makes a lot more sense, right? Especially as an employer to pay that out, that costs you less because your worker isn't demanding more pay because it's not being cut in thirds, right?
And that's
and they have no one to turn
argument.
to.
Yeah, and that's a great argument against the minimum wage. But people
does
prefer
my heart
to use
good
it
to
as
hear a social or an ex-socialist say that.
Yeah.
Does my heart good. Don't you wish I could send this video clip to you about 5 years ago?
Yeah, well, a little more than that, but yes.
You'd be like, what the fuck?
I want to go into the future and punch that guy in the face.
Oh Lord, that guy's an idiot. Wait, that's me.
Right.
People should appreciate that, because we have people who are from all sides of the political spectrum back when, we were all statists at one point, I think. And, we've come from all sides, right? It's not
like Kool-Aid,
it's not just conservatives
like
becoming voluntarists, and it's not just liberals, it's everybody.
He was drinking the orange flavored Kool-Aid. You were drinking the the grape flavor, and I was drinking the blood red. It's just you're still drinking Kool-Aid.
Well, much of it is really just what you're brought up with. I was raised to be very leftist. My dad had a copy of the Communist Manifesto in his garage, and I read it, and back then I don't know how I really recepted it. I don't remember, but
yeah, it's a very hard read.
Yeah. Well, a lot of it, when you read it, it's just like, this guy has no idea what he's talking about. I mean, he's making these broad claims that are just he's taking to be axiom, and it's like, no, that's you're making a lot of assumptions that you can't make here. But.
Well, Marx was a freeloader most of his life. Well, all of his life, and he never worked a day in his life, I don't believe.
And he was terrible with money. He was god awful with money. So.
But yeah, so the illegal immigrants took my job is pretty silly question. The Vice just did a thing about the state I live in, Alabama, put in like this heavy illegal immigration bill, and all these farmers lost all the Mexicans working on their farm, and they went and tried to hire white guys and black guys and Alabamians. And they had to fire them all because they would show up late to work or didn't want to do the work for the pay, and et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, okay, so you're sitting here saying that they're taking jobs that you want away from you. No, like, you just don't want to do the job.
They're just taking the paycheck that they want.
Yeah. Like, you can go sit on welfare and make more than these guys working. Who's worse, you or them? They're working their ass off for $1. You're sitting at the fucking house. So, yeah. Um,
I mean, it's kind of like a bigger issue, really, because with like, people who they feel like, okay, I'm paying taxes into the system, and then oh, that means I'm entitled to X, Y, and Z, and it's like, no, right? Paying taxes, that's just the government taking your money. Whatever they do with it isn't necessarily to benefit you, right? And
Well, that's one thing that pisses me off about Social Security. People who really argue, all of this stuff that millennials wanted are entitlements or are not entitlements. Social Security is an entitlement because we paid for that. And for it's like, yeah, you paid for it, you got scammed, get over it. Sorry, that doesn't mean that you're entitled to my money.
yeah, that's what I told my grandfather. I was like, why am I paying for your Social Security? Because the money that you've paid into it is long gone.
Right.
And he got mad, but hey, whatever.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'd be mad too.
all right,
But
Don't get mad at me. Get mad at the
Right.
government that lied to you. Get mad at FDR
exactly.
and whoever fucking voted for him. But yeah, I mean, I guess we're gonna wrap it up. Any closing things you want to say, Phil? Any sites you want to plug or anything?
Well, I guess eventually I'm gonna get back to blogging. It's anarchistician.blogspot.com, or my personal website, philippollard.com, which is just my resume slapped on a screen. But you can donate Bitcoin to me if you want. Give me money for no apparent reason.
Yeah. Chris, anything? Last thing you want to say?
like I mentioned in episode 8, theseedsofliberty.wiki is this new project we're working on, trying to get a lot of voluntarist content in there. So if you are a voluntarist and you want to do a little writing, we totally appreciate you coming and helping write some articles.
Cool. Yeah. We'll make sure to put that in the show notes. Yeah, thanks for watching this, guys. I'm Dave from the Seeds of Liberty. Please check us out at theseedsofliberty.com. Just started up a Patreon page. We're not really gonna be pushing that hard yet. I've got a lot of updating and stuff to do to it, but it is functional. You can go in there and Patreon up $1 a month or whatever. That would be awesome. Help pay for hosting and websites and etc. etc. Yeah, thanks for watching. If you have any questions that you want us to answer, added to this this fine program here, please comment below in the YouTube or Facebook, wherever this is posted, or go to our Facebook page and ask us a question, and we'll answer it on the show. Anyways, thank you so much for watching this show. Signing off.